Welcome, everyone, to Boxing Scene Today here at the ProBox TV studios. Look, you're very lucky to become a champion in this world, even luckier to become a star. Certain people become legends. Unfortunately, the boxing community lost a legend a couple days ago with the passing of George Foreman. We'll discuss his legacy and his career right here inside the ProBox TV studios. Jimmy Smith alongside the champs, Chris Algieri, Paulie Malignaggi. Gentlemen, you can't discuss George Foreman without discussing two George Foremans. And what I mean by this is, I'm the oldest one here. I remember the second half of George Foreman's career. He boxed until 1977, lost to a fighter named Jimmy Young, if you ever want to win some trivia, retired, came back 10 years later in 1987, became champion again in 1994. That second run, I remember in my childhood. And when Mike Tyson was at his baddest, I told my dad, man, I've never seen anything like this. And he went, young George Foreman was like that. And I went, the guy... The eating guy, like, you know, that though, George, he goes, you don't get.
Jovial George?
You don't get. He was not Grandpa George Foreman. And I think nowadays a fight fan might understand, like Grandpa Mike Tyson, the one we see now, that, oh my God, no, Mike Tyson. I remember, F you till you love me. I want to eat his children. I remember that Mike Tyson. George Foreman, a similar kind of thing, a rebirth the second half of his career. Guys, once again, Mike had that, but he didn't have that competitively. He was done competing by this point. Have you ever seen a story like George Foreman?
Nah, man. I mean, I've been saying it the last few days, to have 20 years in between championship reigns, and not just 20 years between championship reigns in two eras that are fondly remembered in heavyweight history as some of the most competitive, if not among the best eras in heavyweight history. You know, he had a title in the Ali where he lost to Ali. You know, took a hibernation during the Holmes era, and then came back during the Tyson Holyfield Bowe era and won another title. It's really and Lennox Lewis era, all those guys, and really remarkable. To me, I said this recently, to me, that is the equivalent for American fans of this 56-game hitting streak for Joe DiMaggio. That will never be broken. 20 years difference in between title reigns, that'll never be broken.
And Champ, it wasn't like George came back and because of his namesake, he could just step right into a title fight. He did like a grassroots approach. He came back and fought multiple times a year. I think he fought like 10, 12 times a year.
It's funny. He fought in his return against Steve Zalski, like in a regular small ballroom type of spot, you know, like he took it from the grassroots.
Exactly like I said, grassroots, yeah.
I don't like modern movies. I actually can't stand them, but being that George passed away this past week, the Foreman movie was on TV. So I was like, you know what, I'll watch it, you know, because Foreman just passed away. And, you know, I think it could be better, obviously, because I think modern movies suck. But nonetheless, the storyline still captivated me, you know, and his return against Zalski, you know, and the curiosity and everything. You know what's an interesting thing? When you look at it, and he made the Saturday Night Live appearance with Johnny Carson and everything. The first go-around, he's mean. He's got the scowl. He's got this intimidating figure and all this other stuff. And he takes himself very seriously, you know, and everything Ali did to him in the psychology, you know, kind of affected him because he takes himself very seriously. In the comeback, obviously, beneath the surface, he's taking himself seriously because he prepared very well and he was always ready for fights. But on the outside, he had this jovial approach, like you said. He had this, I'm not taking myself seriously. So when the media would write him off, instead of getting angry, maybe the old George would have gotten angry. He kind of joked around with them. Yeah, I'm gonna fight some dead bodies or whatever. I'm gonna fight some, you know, guys, kitchen workers or whatever. But in the meantime, below the surface, he had the wherewithal and the mental presence to understand that, you know, he was preparing in a certain way for a certain kind of thing and for a certain kind of fights. And he got there, you know? So really, it's interesting, not just the two title reigns, but the approach in both of them. Because in the first one, he underachieves. He's the guy who's supposed to be the man at that era. You know, Ali was a major underdog going into that fight. Yeah. He just destroyed Frazier. He just destroyed Norton. Two guys who had given Ali very tough fights.
2 rounds each of those fights. 2 rounds each.
Two guys who had given Ali hell. So
Blasted Chuvalo as well.
Yeah, Blasted Chuvalo who had an iron chin.
Yeah, you couldn't stop that guy. Yeah.
So he underachieves the first time around. He loses to Ali, and then it sort of spins out of control after that, you know? And he ends up with the Lyle fight where he's up and down, like, you know, but before the Ali fight, he's unstoppable. All of a sudden now he's losing to Ali. He's down against Lyle in a life and death fight. Then he loses to Jimmy Young. So you look at it in the overall grand scheme of things, he actually underachieves the first time around. And who knows if he's even a Hall of Famer if that's his career. Yep. But then the return is complete opposite. Now nobody expects anything from him. He's not the favorite. in terms of the favorite as far as the expectation is concerned. Nobody expects anything. As a matter of fact, a lot of people thought it was a joke, and he knew how to joke along with them while at the same time taking himself very seriously. And his performances speak for themselves, and that is a really, really inspiring story. You know, from a sporting point of view, from a mental point of view, from the man himself too, because he did it while being friendly to all, despite everybody being negative towards him, to eventually winning everybody over and everybody rooting for him and everybody wanting to, you know, being so happy for him when he wins the heavyweight title in 1994.
If you think about George and how many lives he's lived in his in this era that we're talking about, right? You know, so I think he's 76 years old when he passed.
Yep.
You know, a couple days ago. I mean, how many lives did he actually live? We mentioned the mean, surly guy who was like Sonny Liston-esque.
Yeah.
I always think about Sonny Liston.
Whom he sparred with, and I guess he absorbed
that
Yeah.
gangster mentality. You know, George wasn't a gangster, but he was a mean guy and he was a street guy. Sonny was a gangster. It was different mindset. But like you said, being around that when you're younger and you're seeing, wow, this is that guy that I've been looking at my whole life. Now I'm training with him. Okay, this is how you become heavyweight champion. This is the guy. I'm that guy, and he's got the physical talents. I mean, he looked like an Adonis. His physique for that era is out of control.
Monster.
I mean, monster. And his punch was just so devastating. We talked about the Kenny Norton. We talked about the Kenny Norton, George Foreman destruction. I think he dropped them both. He dropped Frazier 6 times the first time. Dropped Kenny 3 times when they fought the first time. I mean, the one time. And then he goes through everything with Ali, of course. You know, he loses. And like you said, Champ, I think you made a great point. If he stuck it out that first run, he probably, first of all, we wouldn't be talking about him today, but he probably wouldn't be a Hall of Famer. He would have been one of those heavyweights. I got a title, I lost the biggest fight of my career, and then I just kept losing a bunch of ho-hum guys. He disappears. I don't know if he was planning this. He finds God.
The movie and a couple of things I've read, he actually ran into money problems. He misinvested his money, or he trusted the wrong people. There's actually an interview I saw with him.
Pretty common.
There's actually an interview I saw with him, an old interview, maybe from the 80s or 90s, where people that were he was doing the interview and he was talking about it, and he said, "Yeah, my money."
So
I needed money.
He had to come back.
The irony of that is this for me. The Foreman grill needed a representative, the grill. Yeah. They went to Hulk Hogan first, and he turned it down, actually. And then they go to George Foreman. I think the reason you go to George Foreman is because he's an active fighter in that moment. If George Foreman is not active in that moment, he's probably not even in their minds to think, oh, let's use him as the face of this company. So think about this. In a way, misinvesting his money ended up being a blessing in disguise, because it forced him to come back, which puts him back in the picture and his brand and image in the picture, so that these people who are there are now thinking, maybe this guy's the face of the company. And then he says yes, because you got to accept it.
Yeah.
And from there, it just takes off.
But
I mean, even that.
Hundreds of millions.
Even if it was the money thing that brought him back, the way that he went about it, he had to have wanted to fight. He wanted to prove that he was going to be that guy that you said he was supposed to be.
It shows you what's inside him.
Exactly.
So the DNA of a man.
He's the DNA of a fighter and a true champion. Listen, having one career become champion that's awesome. Doing it twice is crazy. So you think about this, the guy, he was that destroyer. Then he disappears and becomes a preacher. And he does that for a while. He starts a family. Then he comes back and he's the jovial George Foreman. And then on top of that, he gets this multi-million-dollar deal with the George Foreman, grill. What was the saying?
At its peak, I read it at its peak.
Knock out the fat.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
At its peak, he was making $4.5 million a month off the grill.
He made $200 million.
And then he got a buyout for like $138 million or something like that.
Well, how many George Foreman grills have you owned?
We've all had them in our teams.
I've had at least a dozen
Yeah.
over my years.
But,
and then he comes, and then on top of that, he comes back and he's a great commentator.
Yeah.
On HBO on the biggest platform possible.
Yeah.
And he was fantastic there too. So this guy just doesn't know how to miss. He's just a winner.
Yeah.
George Foreman, man.
Andrew Golota, Riddick Bowe. We all know about the riot in the garden, and he was ringside for that
That's a
one.
good point too.
And one of the things that stands out to me about George Foreman, I remember on air hearing him say, "Don't do it. Come on, man. What are you doing?
Son.
Don't do it, son. Don't do it." Trying to be the peacemaker.
Yeah.
Trying to keep young men from making bad decisions in the ring, and trying to be the voice of reason with people. And I remember, to your point about him not taking himself seriously, him saying, "Yeah, it was a rope-a-dope. I'm the dope." He goes, "Yeah, I was the stupid one."
Yeah.
And he said, and the crowd kept Ali up. I got to feel what that was like, with people going, George. He goes, that kept me. Michael Moore beat the dog piss out of him for
Michael
9
Moore's,
rounds.
Michael
Everybody
Moore's
forgets
a bad
that.
dude back then.
A slick boxer, hard to hit, southpaw.
Like a punch too.
And Foreman took all that,
Well,
knowing I can
think about the
alter it.
psychology of the fight. The young Foreman falls into that psychology of punching himself out and not being patient enough and letting his emotions get the best of him in the Ali fight, and before he knows it, he's punched out.
But also getting broken down mentally.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, because he's punched out now. He's getting broken down mentally, and the breaking down mentally is what's making him fight harder than he needs to.
Ali was talking to him the whole time.
In the Moore fight, he's losing every round, but he's not fighting as harder than he needs to. He's like, all right, so this is the way it's going to be. Okay, I'm going to hang around. I'm going to try to position him the way I need to, whatever. The Foreman of the Ali fight would have come out outside of his own shell and maybe threw too many punches or punched himself out even in the Moore fight, or got himself knocked out trying too hard to catch up to Moore. While the older Foreman says, okay, I've been through this with Ali. I was, punching him around, and then it ended up costing me. Well, Moore's punching me around, but let's see if I can make it cost him. And in the end, he did it.
It's funny. I think it was the 24/7 when they were talking about that fight, and Foreman said, he was like, I was using.
What about the legendary nights?
I think that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
One of the greatest.
Not 24/7. I meant legendary
More
nights.
to this day says he
By the
got
way,
lucky.
check that out. It's on YouTube.
But if you
So
really
good.
watch that though, he's throwing these wide sweeping left hooks, and it's basically like
it was the
forearming,
clubbing Foreman shots.
and it was moving Michael to his left, which was going into his right hand. And what's the punch that finished it? Bing bing boom. It was just a beautiful 1-2. He actually hits him with a good 1-2. And then he stings him, and then George follows up with another 1-2 right after it. Bing, bing, and that just put him away. I think he was actually out on his feet the first one, and then George just put one more on him. Didn't allow him to recover. And, like Moore says, no way he was setting me up. He got lucky. I don't know, man. I watched that fight back a bunch of times. He looked like he was maneuvering
But also,
Mike
if you're
into that shot.
If you're Moore's handlers, he just won the heavyweight title. I get that the re-entry fight would be a guy who's coming off a loss, and it's a name, but he maybe he's past.
But
his
he's
prime.
not.
But it's still a puncher.
Yeah.
You never fight a puncher in just a regular or ordinary re-entry or warm-up fight or stay busy fight. You can choose a lot of guys. You don't take the puncher.
What's so interesting, and we'll end on this note, is the idea that when you talk about heavy-handedness, when you talk about things you can't teach, when you talk about the ability to hit, to punch. Tommy Hearns, to me, is one of my favorite boxers of all time, one of my favorite punchers of all time. He was taught how to beautifully turn over. His shots, you go, that's how you do that.
Yep.
Foreman, I tell boxers, don't punch like that. Because he could go.
It's like a caveman.
Well, Tommy had to be taught how to punch.
Caveman.
Tommy wasn't a puncher in the amateurs.
Yeah.
He
was
had
not.
to be taught.
Yeah,
George was a puncher out of the womb.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, speaking of interviews, I've been looking into this these last few days with Foreman's death. There's a barbershop chat with Shannon Briggs in the barbershop chat. I don't know if you guys saw this. Where he's talking.
Last fight for Foreman, by the way, was Shannon Briggs.
They ask him about the hardest punchers he fought. They were like Lennox, Klitschko. He's like, yeah. He goes, nah, champ. He goes, I fought Lennox, yeah, Klitschko, yeah. I've been hit by a truck, yeah. He goes, Foreman. he goes. I even been hit by a truck. Nah, it was Foreman. He goes, Foreman hit me harder than anything else, even the truck.
Jimmy, to your point, the Jerry Cooney fight, the punches he was throwing, they didn't look good at all. He's throwing uppercuts from his back pocket and just knocking Jerry. Jerry was a big, strong heavyweight. Great, not the greatest chin, not world-class chin, but a world-class puncher.
And I think Jerry also hit him with a good shot early in that fight too.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he actually
took it too.
Because Jerry could really punch, and that's another thing about George. He wasn't just a puncher; he was super durable too. He only got stopped by a leg.
Everybody makes like, oh, he had a better chin in his comeback. Not really. I mean, he didn't have a bad chin in his first go round until the Ali fight. Then all of a sudden his chin just went.
Yeah.
But his chin was always pretty good. Before the Ali fight, so I just think he got worn out.
I don't care.
And then in the comeback, he had a better chin in the comeback. Not really. He never had a bad chin to begin with. In my eyes,
made of iron.
He spent two fights with Joe Frazier. Joe Frazier, he checks your chin. I don't care who you are. He hits you.
Frazier threw us a couple
Yes,
of
he did. He hit him.
fights.
Yeah, he hit him.
But when you look
Nassau
at
Coliseum in the rematch.
Nassau Coliseum, we remember it well.
Island.
Like I said, there are stars, there are champions, there are legends. Boxing lost a legend. But the one thing we can take from it, he had a great life, a great career, was a great human being, touched a lot of lives. I hope at the end we can say the same thing about ourselves. We appreciate you here on Boxing Scene Today, and we'll be back with more news, find out why millions are watching.